Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey. I am Rob, your host, and back on the show, Chris Ruhland. How you doing, Chris?
Hey Rob, I'm great. How are you?
Good. It's the Saturday before Thanksgiving, so I thought we should have a conversation. You know, I've done kind of a holiday show last year, but I've not dove into Thanksgiving and kind of thinking about that. I'm going to call it an event. You know, it's a meal, but it's an event. It's an all-day kind of thing. And it can be somewhat small. It can be somewhat big. And, you know, I wanted to dive into how wine and drinks and alcohol play a part in that day and maybe the next morning.
Nice.
So I asked you to come on and let's do a Thanksgiving episode. We'll put this out in a couple of days. It'll be about a few days before Thanksgiving. Hopefully people who are kind of listening to the podcast and have some questions on, man, I still got to figure out wines and drinks, and I got the meal ready, but I don't know what to do. This will hopefully give them some guidance anyway.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob, and thanks for having me on. It's such a fascinating topic in a way because I definitely think there are some things to be said about drinks on Thanksgiving that, you know, there are some better drinks than others. Like I probably wouldn't serve frozen pina colada to friends as they walked in the door on a cold Thanksgiving evening. You know, so there are things that we can say, I think, about that. But you know, I don't know about you, but I've always found Thanksgiving to be pretty stressful a lot of times, just because of the whole family dynamics. And it's like anytime you have to have fun, you know, it's like you have to get together and you have to.
That's a great point. You have to have fun on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I don't know. I found it stressful. And what I don't like is one of the things about wine and drinks in general is just all this idea that, well, let's just add some more stress by telling you that, you know, you're probably going to screw up the Thanksgiving wine selection, or you might screw it up and you're going to ruin Thanksgiving unless you have it figured out. And you asked me to be on this podcast, so I just looked, and literally just 2 days ago, Wine Enthusiast published an article entitled "Pairing Wines for Thanksgiving. Here's a Cheat Sheet." Okay, and
that's got to be very helpful for everybody.
Okay, well,
so buy the magazine, and I'm done.
Okay, and if it is helpful for somebody, that's awesome. I'm happy for them. But let me just read you a quote from this.
Okay,
to highlight what I'm talking about. Okay. It says, Thanksgiving wine pairings can be a high-stakes game, especially if your guest list runs long. With a wide range of bold flavors on the table and so many palates to please, there's plenty that can go wrong. So they're starting out by telling you...
Well, that just created some stress.
Stakes. Yeah, it's high stakes, and there's plenty that go wrong. Like, something bad is going to happen with your wine at Thanksgiving. And I just think... And then, by the way, they go on and they say, oh, we're going to tell you what to do. So they've got 11 dishes and the best wine to pair with each dish. So, for example, with Brussels sprouts, you're supposed to pair 2021 Albarino, and with mashed potatoes, you're supposed to pair 2019 Gruner Veltliner. And for mashed potatoes. For sweet potatoes, you're supposed to pair a Grenache Shiraz blend from Australia. So it's like,
so each person, let me get this straight, each person should have about 7 wine glasses around their plate.
Yeah.
And depending on what you take a bite of,
Yeah. And if you don't, buy these wines, I guess you're going to lose the high stakes game. So I just want to say the first thing is that just relax about it, you know? I mean, there's plenty to say, and I think it's interesting.
Well, I think the first thing that, when you read that first statement, read it one more time, the beginning of that article.
Thanksgiving wine pairings can be a high-stakes game, especially if your guest list runs long.
And then, what did it say?
With a wide range of bold flavors on the table and so many palates to
Bingo.
please.
Why are you worried about everybody's palate? I think you have taught me it's about the food and what wine goes with that food, not what, because that should complement to people's palate, because if the food and wine go well together, then their palate should be happy.
It should, and do we have to run around and ask everybody about their palates before we buy the wine for Thanksgiving? I don't know. And again, I don't mean to knock them that much in the sense that if somebody finds this stuff helpful, that's great. I just think let's reduce the stress level a little bit,
Yeah.
and just realize that we're probably not going to do anything that's going to ruin Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
with our wine.
And if you don't mind, let's start first with what's traditionally thought to be a good pairing with Thanksgiving dinner, which I think if you went white, it's Chardonnay, and then for the red, it's that Pinot Noir. And you might talk a little bit about why that is.
So this is the advice that's given every single year, and you could probably pull up 10 articles that were written in the last week that will talk about Pinot Noir. For this, Pinot Noir in particular always comes up, and then Chardonnay. Start with Chardonnay maybe, or have a Chardonnay, have a Pinot Noir. The reason why you see that advice is much broader than Thanksgiving. I mean, because Chardonnay and Pinot Noir go with almost everything, and particularly Pinot Noir. If you're talking about a red wine, a Pinot Noir can go with fish, it can go with chicken, turkey, other kinds of meats. So,
even the gravies and things like that with the
yeah,
richness, it's got enough acidity to cut through that.
yeah. So this is Pinot Noir is kind of like the Swiss Army knife, of wines in a way. So I think that is one thing about Thanksgiving dinner is that you've got so many different types of foods potentially, and some weird foods, like cranberry sauce, for example, that you don't see a lot, at least in the States. You don't see that a lot during the year at the dinner table.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's where that advice comes from. It's actually reasonable advice, which is find something that's not going to clash badly with the food.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to get, and so the point there is it's not a bad choice. That's actually a good choice because it's versatile. It works, but it's not something that is a Thanksgiving tradition that there's some, tie to Thanksgiving. That's not why they're recommending that wine. It's what you said. It's just very versatile. It works with a lot of different foods. So therefore, when you think about a Thanksgiving dinner plate, I mean, you got from stuffing to mashed potatoes to a green bean casserole to turkey. I mean, there's a lot of different things, Brussels sprouts or whatever the veggie dish might be, and this would work with all of them. That's why it's presented.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think Pinot Noir was the Pilgrim's wine or was
Yeah,
that wine, but
probably
yeah, I
Madeira.
think
Yeah,
right, Madeira. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's just a matter of it's a very safe choice,
yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with it. And it's frankly, I haven't just figured out yet what we're going to have. I may have some ideas for our Thanksgiving dinner, but um, I don't think you can go wrong with Pinot Noir. Have a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir and let people have whatever they want to have.
So I've got some. We'll go through, and in the course of this conversation, there may be some other options that are presented by you, and let's see if there are. But let's talk about Thanksgiving. I mean, you're right. It can be stressful if you have our family. This is the one holiday every year that it's kind of the family get together. This is where everybody gets together, and the house rotates as to who's hosting. And this year, Sandra and I are hosting. And when you're the host of a big Thanksgiving dinner, it can be stressful. Just in the preparation of all of the food and the logistics of, having enough seating for everybody and how you're going to set it up and who's going to sit where. And then now you got to think about, wines and things like that too. That to me sometimes can be oh crap, I got to go get, wine for dinner as well. I've gotten the turkey and all of this ready, but I got to get wines. So let's start with talking about coursing out the meal. Because I think about when I'm cooking all day, if I'm hosting, we're going to have different courses. Maybe this kind of munchy, kind of nibbling, cheese boards, whatever, into maybe an appetizer before dinner, and then into dinner, and then desserts. So let's start with the munchy phase. If you have a cheese board out, because you don't have to stay with. I think people kind of have this perception that Thanksgiving's all Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Doesn't have to be. You can go around the globe and have all kinds of wines that day.
Yeah, and I do have some ideas for other wines, but if you want to talk about this pre-stage where there are a lot of maybe cheeses or salty foods, like nuts, anything that would be considered something you can just grab and throw in your mouth before dinner. I think the classic wine for that is champagne, I think, and it's probably what we'll do. I think, any champagne goes well with anything that's salty. And so, and I think like a Blanc de Blanc champagne would be ideal because it's 100% Chardonnay, so it might not have the fruit complexity that other champagnes might have, and it could be simple. Um, and if you don't want to do champagne, some other sparkling wine, California sparkling wine, for example. But yeah, something like that. It's festive too, right? Because Thanksgiving is
Yeah.
supposed to be festive, so it's something festive. So that's what I usually do is start with a champagne and go from there. And some people don't like champagne, so maybe having a light-bodied white wine wouldn't be a bad choice there too. Or and of course, I don't know how you feel about making cocktails while all that's sitting out there, but that adds to the structure of the event. But yeah,
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. Cocktails, I think, still apply. I think they're fun. I think people enjoy a cocktail, um, and it can hold back a little bit on the wine. I understand that there can be a lot more alcohol in a cocktail, or if you were just going with a whiskey, which sometimes I do, but I sip on it a little bit longer. I do
yeah.
sometimes like when I'm cooking and prepping and doing things to have a whiskey before I get into the wines. So I think that's a great point. Do you have a couple cocktails that you like during the holidays, during Thanksgiving?
I do, and the thing about cocktails, so I make a lot of cocktails at home, um, and one of the things that I always have to think about when I'm making cocktails is how many people am I having? So if it's just for my wife and me, let's say, that gives me more flexibility in a way to spend more time on the cocktail. But you were talking about an entire event, Thanksgiving. There's a lot going on. Um, I think having something that's simple, at least in your mind, that's simple, that you know what it is and can make, but that's also appropriate, is good. So there are a lot of options, but I also tend to think of cocktails as being weather dependent to some extent.
I agree.
So, like in the summer, gin and tonics, for example, might be something I would do. In the winter, I'm going more towards darker spirits, whiskey, and bourbon cocktails. And there are plenty of those, but I'll tell you that one that I really like that is easy to remember because it's equal proportions um, in the winter is called a blood and sand.
Ah,
I don't know if you've ever had one of those
have
before, but
not.
so it's one part each of scotch, sweet vermouth, cherry brandy or cherry hearing, and orange juice. So you
Okay.
get those four ingredients, shake it with ice and strain it into a cocktail glass. Maybe put maraschino cherry in the bottom of the glass. Um, but it's kind of a heartier cocktail. To me, even though it's cold, obviously, it just feels like a more cold weather cocktail. And given that it's equal parts of four things, you can get the orange juice ahead of time. The other three ingredients, hopefully you have or can grab, and shake them up and pour them.
Yeah.
They're very popular over at the Ruhland household.
What are your thoughts on ciders? Maybe in some parts of the country it's still cold, and a lot of people talk about a cider. Finding one with lower alcohol, in that wine style, not a beer style, but in a wine style cider. Do you like those? Do you drink those?
It's funny. I actually have not gotten into ciders very deeply. I have had ciders that I've liked, but for me, there's always something else that I would
Okay.
rather have. But on the other hand, that points to the idea that I definitely think for an event like Thanksgiving, we're having family, you have a lot of different people. The last thing you want to do is force everybody to drink the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always good having options. So what we will have, something like a cider is a good option for people. They don't want a cocktail or they don't want champagne. I try to always have some kind of backup at the house. For example, let's just say this goes beyond Thanksgiving. Let's say I'm having a meal, I'm serving red wine. I'll keep a couple white wines cold just in case. If somebody says, "Oh, I don't really like red wine," or "Can I have a white wine?" I don't have to say, "No, you can't have that." Um, and so, in this case, especially if you have a lot of people, you're just going to have different thoughts about what to do, and people who don't want to go along with the program. And so it's nice to have something like that, I think, around.
I do think, and I think that's a great point. I've not gotten into ciders a lot either. I heard somebody ask, I didn't hear, they asked me about them, and I said, I don't know a lot about them, but I'm going to ask Chris because I didn't even think about that as an option. I wrote it down and made sure I wanted to ask you about it because I hadn't even thought of that. But I think this year I'm going to do like you said and get a couple bottles and just have them available. If somebody's interested, I'll pop one and see what they think, because I looked at them a little bit, and you can find them for, 12 to 15, 12 to 20 bucks. So it's not hugely priced to be able to have it as an option, like you said, for some of your guests.
Yeah, I just think in general that Thanksgiving, I don't know how you do it, but it's interesting that, you said that you course it out, which I think is more than probably a lot of people do. Like, I think a lot of people just have the courses, and then you get your plate, you put whatever you want on your plate.
Including the snacky food and everything?
Well, no, the snacky food would be something else, but I'm just
Okay.
saying once we have dinner, what my experience is anyway, I mean, it was just like, okay, here's the stuff, grab a plate, you know.
Yeah, and let me clarify, Chris. By course it out, I mean, typically Thanksgiving, because people are coming in from out of town, some are staying maybe with us, some are staying at relatives' house around the area, some might be in a hotel. The day of Thanksgiving, the football game starts fairly early. That first game comes on.
Right.
It's usually like, hey, when you guys are up and ready and you're ready to come over, come on. That's the day with family. So
Yeah.
we try to make sure when somebody says, hey, we're going to be there by the time, first game kicks off, we try to have foods out and available for people to come over and munch on or whatever.
Yeah.
So I call that course number one. The
Okay.
meal, course number two. That's loading up
Okay.
the plate. And,
All right. Okay.
and course
That makes
number
more
three
sense.
is pies and stuff later.
I got you. Okay.
Course four might be at 11 o'clock at night making a cold turkey sandwich.
Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense. Okay.
Okay.
Now I understand what you're talking about. But okay. So if that's what you're talking about, then I think that, so Thanksgiving then becomes something, because you have family and because they're all different, and there's a lot going on. I just think it's one of those meals that where it's different from what I normally do with wine. Normally, if I'm having people over, they're friends, they really might be in a certain zone with wine, and I might have more of a program essentially for the wine. Whereas Thanksgiving, I just think is more relaxed in the sense of, here's some wines that are open, have whichever one you want. If you have a cider, here's some champagne, here's some options, just so that people can really select what they want to drink, as opposed to me telling them this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
If that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And my point in asking that first one was because I thought you might have a suggestion or two, and I like the champagne option because I want to do that this year with the snacky kind of food. But I do have something that, my wife's family, when we have that kind of grazing time before the meal, one of the snacky foods that we always have is chili con queso. It's just, you're watching football. I know it's Thanksgiving, but, my wife and her family are Hispanic, and so a spicy chili con queso, I think you would agree champagne could still work, but would you have another suggestion for somebody who's having something spicy, prior to Thanksgiving?
Well, I definitely think champagne would work. I also think as you get into with spicy foods, for me, wines that have some sweetness to them, maybe some residual sugar. So a Riesling would be good. I think with something like that, that would probably be my choice. Some people don't like sweet wines, or at least believe they don't like sweet wines. And so that's why I think you might need different options for people who want
Gotcha.
to stay away from that. But see, this gets into the other issue, and I guess I've hinted at it, which is, it's Thanksgiving. You have so many different personalities with the family members. These are not people you chose, right? These are
Yeah.
people who are in your family. And so it just gets harder. I think it's one of these things where it's a contrast again. If we're having two couples over for dinner that are good friends of ours, that might be where I break out geeky wines. things that I'm really into that I think I want to show them, hey, they go really well with this food and we need to try this and I want to kind of show you why this works. I'm not trying to do that on Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
okay? Because I don't want to get into something with a family member about, well, why are we doing this? And then I get offended or they get offended. I would just like to make it more like, here are your options. Here's some things that you're not going to dislike.
There's going to be something you're going to find that you can
Yeah,
drink.
yeah.
Or
yeah.
the other solution is I tell people, feel free to bring whatever you like to drink. I throw that out to our family. Hey, I'm going to have some stuff open, but if there's something you like, feel free to bring it.
Hey, Rob, would you mind sending an email to my family or my wife's family asking them to bring whatever they like? Because that would make my life a lot easier.
Would it make it a lot easier?
Totally, yeah.
Because you're right. Some people like or don't like, what they like and don't like. So it's hard to please everybody. You never can. And when you have a larger family, it becomes even more difficult and can be more stressful for the host. So in our family, we always throw that out. Hey, if there's something specific you like, bring it.
Yeah, and if you want to talk, families, there are different types of families, right? Or different things that are going on. Thanksgiving dinner for a long time, I moved, as you know, about a year ago. But before that, it was at my mom's house, who lived very close by to where I lived, and we would all go there. My brother, my sister, and their families, spouses, kids, whatever. My mom's just not into wine. I mean, she drinks it if it's on the table and you pour her glass, and my sister's not really into wine, and my brother's wife is kind of into wine. So in that circumstance, I spent very little time, honestly, thinking about what wine to bring for Thanksgiving, because what I knew is that it wouldn't matter. I could bring a great wine, a not a great wine. They just didn't care. So if they don't care, and I'm not knocking them, by the way, for not caring, that's just the way they are. If they don't care, why am I going to stress about what to bring for Thanksgiving?
So in that scenario, you still try to get something that you're going to enjoy, but
Yes.
It's not going to break the bank and it's not going to require overthinking about, what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, why should I spend a lot of money on wine for people who aren't going to appreciate it? And by that I mean, really do not care. And they won't notice a difference between, a really good wine and just an okay wine, and it won't bother them one way or the other. So yeah, it doesn't make any sense economically. It also just doesn't make any sense in terms of practically. And also, what if I do bring the wine and I bring a really nice wine and nobody wants to drink it? It's just it's a situation that just calls for handling it differently than where you have people
I think
who
that's
care
a
about
great
the wine.
I think that's a great point. And it's one of the kind of questions I had for you, how here you go, Chris, you ready? How size matters.
It's a size matter.
Are you having a small dinner? Say you're just having an intimate Thanksgiving dinner with a family of 6 and you all enjoy wine. There you might say, hey, I'm going to spend a little bit more and I'm going to put out on the table some things that, this is a special holiday. Maybe I'm going to spend it and we're going to enjoy some really good bottles of wine. The opposite of that would be, to your point, if you have a large family, like I think sounds like you do and we do, you're not going to go that route, and you're going to just kind of put out some things that are good things to drink, maybe some options, and let people pick and choose what they want, not put a lot of thought into it. Would that be fair to say?
I do think the size of the group does matter in many ways. And again, unless you just have unlimited resources and you don't care about money and you want to impress everybody with the wine that you bought, none of those things apply to me, and I think to most of us. But for example, I mean, just to take another, we had a 4th of July party at our house for our neighbors came. A lot of these people are people who actually know quite a bit about wine and enjoy wine, and some of them enjoy high-end wines. But given the amount of people that were coming over, and also given that it's 4th of July, and does it really matter? I just bought some wines that were not very expensive, but were good enough, certainly, and we just opened them all and had them in a big bucket, and it was just grab what you want and drink it. So the wine, I think it's ridiculous to place too much emphasis on the wine in that circumstance, and it's not necessary. So yeah, I mean, if you have a lot of people, now I'm not sure, what a lot is, but if you have a big group, we have friends. I was just talking to somebody today. She's having something like 22 adults to her house on Thanksgiving, and I mean, I don't know what she's going to do, but if that were me, I would not be freaking out about getting too specific with the wines. It'd be some bunch of white wines, a bunch of red wines, and leave it at that.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Uh, Somebody's hosting a Thanksgiving dinner. I think this scenario comes up sometimes. They're hosting, whether it's family or you live in an area where just for whatever reason you're not going to see family or be around family for the holidays. So somebody invites you over, wants to include you for their Thanksgiving and says, hey, how can I contribute? Hey, bring a bottle of wine. If somebody's going to somebody's Thanksgiving and is asked to bring a bottle of wine, would you tell them, well, I'm going to let you answer. I'm not going to lead you. Go ahead.
Well, I think once again it depends on whose house you're going to and what you know about them, right? If you're going to someone's house who's really super into wine and you might bring one thing. If they're not, you'd bring something else. And I do look at it that way plenty of time. But I think let's put it this way: some easy rules of thumb. You can never ever go wrong with bringing a bottle of champagne to somebody's house,
Good
right?
point.
When have you ever had somebody bring a bottle of champagne to your house and you thought, geez, I wish they
This is
brought
going to
something else.
suck.
Yeah, right. So you can never go wrong with doing it. And there are plenty of champagne can get expensive, but there are $40 bottles of champagne that are really good, and you could do that. If you don't want to do that,
Well, and
I
to that
think,
point, Chris, I think $40, $50, somebody's cooking you an entire meal.
oh
That's
yeah,
not a big number when you think about somebody's putting out the effort to cook an entire meal for you and invite you over. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong,
I
but I
agree.
just don't think 40, $50. You're going to go out and spend that at a dinner easy without
I
drinks.
I agree. I'm very appreciative when somebody has me over, and I want to do something to acknowledge that. And so, yes, I think bringing champagne would be a great idea. The other thing you could do would be to go in the other direction, looking towards the end of the meal. I think is always interesting. Maybe bring a tawny port,
I
or
think that's a great idea.
something like that, where it's something that is a treat, so to speak, and can be served at the end. Because I think that's the thing where I think a lot of people struggle is the end of the meal. What do you do with the pecan pie? What do you do with the pumpkin pie?
Okay, we're going to get
Um,
there in a second.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, not to move ahead, but I mean, I think that's something you could do is maybe take care of that part of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great tip when you're asked to bring a bottle of wine because I think that's something people don't think about what you just mentioned, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But I do want to continue with the Thanksgiving meal itself. Some people might look at Pinot Noir as what's suggested, and it's a good option. But some people might go, one, my budget doesn't allow me to buy a Pinot, and Pinots can get kind of expensive. And two, maybe it's a larger group and you want to have, 3 or 4 bottles for the group on the table for Thanksgiving dinner. I know where you're going to go with this, but I want you to say it. What is a option that's, I don't want to say similar to Pinot, but kind of falls in that world of good acidity, good fruit, and would work. People's palate most people would like it. What would be a wine you would suggest?
Well, I think the answer there is Beaujolais, and I happen to love Beaujolais. I mean, it gets a bad rap if you haven't really explored it because of Beaujolais Nouveau. Um, Beaujolais Nouveau are wines that are very very young and released in November, and some of them can be of low quality, but there is a lot of very very high quality Beaujolais. It's particularly what we call cru Beaujolais. So there are 10 crus in Beaujolais that are smaller areas of Beaujolais that are known for very high quality wines. Um, you will see this on the label. It'll say Morgon or Fleury or Moulin Event, for example. There are 10 of them. Uh, and this is probably what I'm going to do for Thanksgiving, and I've done it before, is serve a Cru Beaujolais. Now, some of these can actually get expensive, believe it or not, but many of them are not, and you'll see them on the shelf, especially now because they're popular at this point. Um, you have wines that are lower in tannin, high in acidity, super fruity, super delicious. And these are wines that are going to please people who are really into wine, but also going to please people who aren't. And um, if you haven't really explored Beaujolais, and particularly if you haven't explored Cru Beaujolais, I strongly encourage it because once you do, you start realizing that there's a lot of joy to be had in these wines. And again, much like Pinot Noir, they're very adaptable to different types of foods.
Yeah, I agree, and it's something that I plan on having on the table this week for Thanksgiving as well. I'm a big fan. I know it gets beat up a lot. I know a lot of people beat it up for, it's not like Pinot Noir, but there are a lot of similarities to. I mean, I'm not saying it is like Pinot Noir, but there's some similarities between the two varietals that I think is probably what more people kind of mean when they say it's like Pinot Noir with the acidity in the fruit and the low tannins. But I think it's a great option. Let me ask you this. If there was one wine, and I think you may have just answered it, one wine that you're going to serve, one bottle, what would it be? So you're sitting down at dinner and you're just going to open one bottle. You got six
what
people.
I've done, yeah. I mean, so I go back to Beaujolais, but if you're just going to be one bottle, let's get a Magnum of it. I think that's even. This is something, by the way,
that's what I wanted you to say.
A lot is that. So Magnums of wine are just fun, I mean, when you pull out a Magnum of wine, it's just two bottles in one bottle, right? But there's just something about it. People smile, people think it's cool and they're excited, and they can be hard to track down. Sometimes this goes back to our discussion we've had about buying wine online. It's much easier to buy Magnums online than it is to find them at your local wine store sometimes. But a Magnum of anything is good, and you can find Magnums of Cru Beaujolais.
Yeah, and I agree. I was hoping you would say that because I think a Magnum, people who in my family aren't wine drinkers, they kind of ooh and ah when they see that big bottle.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
I mean, I do, by the way, and I am a big wine drinker, but if I go to someone's house and they open a Magnum of wine, I'm thinking, okay, this is a very cool person. He just did this.
They get a thumbs up pretty quick. They meet approval.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. If you're shopping for wines this week for Thanksgiving, and you have a wine shop, a wine store, would it be your recommendation to go there and shop versus a grocery store or something like that? One, you're going to have better selection, but I think that's the biggest point. But go ahead, your answer.
Well, if you're shopping this week, and to be frank, I may have to do that. Obviously, going earlier rather than later is a better idea. I think that's going to be on the agenda for Monday for me. But once again, I think, given that I think we've agreed that we don't need to stress about this too much, I would just go down to a wine shop on Monday and I would grab. Well, what I would do, honestly, is get multiple bottles of the same wine. It just makes it easier. One of the things that I think people spend too much time worrying about is, let's say they decide that they're going to buy a Chablis, for example, but they have a lot of people. So then it's like, well, we need 3 different bottles, and it can be interesting. I love doing that. I love comparative tastings. I do it all the time, but it's not necessary. Again, for a holiday like this, I would just find, let's say, a Chablis that you like and buy 2 or 3 bottles of it and leave it at that.
I agree 100% because I think, to your point, that this holiday is about family and friends, and you're not trying to dive into the bottle so much where you're analyzing. You just want something that, works with the food and tastes good and enough of it for everybody to be happy.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, and this is coming from someone who spends a lot of time thinking about what wine to open on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But it's funny because on Thanksgiving, I spend less time thinking about it in a way, because it's not as significant. I think this gets to the point that wine should complement what we're doing as opposed to clash with it. So this is why I think there's, in general, way too much time spent on figuring out what is the best Thanksgiving wine or the best Christmas wine. It's as if that's what the holiday is about. I mean, they're about other things, and this is why, again, on the 4th of July, I'm not going to make the whole day. I'm not going to give the whole day about some bottle of wine I collected. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's weird because we already have all these other things going on in Thanksgiving. You're right. It's about family and perhaps friends that you've invited over. It's about getting together. I'm not going to run around and just tell everybody, hey, look at this bottle of wine I acquired.
Yeah.
What do you think about it? It just seems odd in that circumstance.
Right. Well, the main reason I was talking about, I think a store, wine shop, a big box wine store, if you have one in your market, is the place to go, is because a lot of grocery stores are cab heavy, especially here in the States.
Yeah.
And they don't carry any or a very small selection of maybe some Pinots or more specifically Beaujolais, which I think is just a great option for Thanksgiving. And so going to a wine shop or a wine store, you're going to have a better option of finding some of the crews that you recommended and just Beaujolais in general.
Yeah. I don't, it depends on the market, I suppose. I do think there are some, as you know, I live in Austin, and there's a Central Market, which if I went there today, probably has, they might have a decent Beaujolais.
They're a wine shop.
You think so? Okay.
No, their selection. I only say that because we have one in the city of Houston. We have one Central Market,
Yeah.
but their selection at this one, I've never been to the one in Austin, is phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah, it's really good. So that's what I was saying. It can vary, right? But if you would go to, Randall's or something, would they have Beaujolais? I don't know. Maybe
yeah,
not. And you're right, it's they're depend on different things. And you mentioned Cabernet Sauvignon. If you like it and want to have it for Thanksgiving, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It probably doesn't pair the best with the Thanksgiving meal in theory, because especially if you've got a very tannic wine. But you know, if it's something that you enjoy and you feel safe with, that's fine. I just think that there's,
and if you
you know,
just want
there,
to sit around after dinner and drink a cab and watch football, knock yourself out.
yeah. I mean, if that's your thing, yeah. I
Absolutely,
mean, after dinner, I'm probably moving on to other things, but yeah.
probably a whiskey for you.
Well, that, or this is also the time of year too. So I don't know about you, but I really like brandy. So I like Armagnac and cognac.
Yes,
And the other thing, now that we're in the fall, Calvados.
I don't know that.
Um, yeah, so Calvados is a spirit made in mostly in like the Normandy area of France, from apples.
Ah,
And that is a great cooler weather, because it's like brandy, pour it in a glass. We're not there's no ice involved, hopefully, and it's warming alcohol. And so going back to the issue of seasonality in spirits, I think things like cognac, Armagnac, Calvados, those can be on a cold day. They can feel pretty good.
totally agree. Totally agree with that. Okay, you ready to jump into? We kind of touched on it earlier, but the desserts of the evening. After you've
Yeah,
had that hour and a half rest on the couch,
yeah.
then you can get ready for your choice of one or multiple pieces of pie. With I think typically pumpkin pie, apple pie, pecan pie are probably the three staples. I do hear people talk about a chocolate pie. I've never had a chocolate pie at Thanksgiving, but
I
I'm
haven't
sure
either.
I've heard
Yeah,
a lot of people tell me don't forget chocolate, and I went,
yeah.
okay, never heard of it, but okay.
And though I'm not sure I've ever had an apple pie on Thanksgiving either. I don't know that I've ever had anything on Thanksgiving other than pumpkin pie and pecan pie.
Yeah, we have apple pie every year. I don't eat it,
Yeah,
but pumpkin and pecan are my two favorites.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think those are the standards, right?
So when we start talking about dessert, and maybe somebody wants to have we're not done drinking alcohol yet. We're still ready to go.
I'm
Um,
not.
so some dessert options, and there's a rule when you have dessert and you want to pair alcohol with it, and how does that work, Chris?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a rule, but I think there's some guidance because sweet foods can make your wine seem drier. that's essentially and more acidic. So it's if you were to take a sweet food, something like a pecan pie, for example, it's got a lot of sugar in it, in particular. So if you were to take that and then you go back to your dry Chardonnay, for example, your Chablis, let's say, it's going to make that wine taste even drier, more acidic, more bitter, less fruity. And I just don't think that's what most people really want in that glass of wine. But that is what will happen because of the way sugar really primes your mouth to expect more sugar, right?
Yeah.
And so this is one of the things about wine and food pairing that actually does make sense as opposed to trying to match up certain foods and certain wines in a very specific way. This is actually based in reality about how your tongue works and your sense of taste works. So I would stay away from your dry wines when you're having dessert. They just won't be as enjoyable. They could taste worse. Let's put it that way.
Okay. And so the general guidance is, I think what I've heard is that you want your sweet wine to be a little bit sweeter than whatever dessert you're having.
Yeah, I don't know that it needs to be sweeter, and in some cases, I might go even. I think it needs to be sweet. It should
Okay.
have some sweetness to it. I've heard that too, but I've actually had situations like if you've got a super super sweet dessert, um, you might even think about dialing the sweetness down. I mean, having a sweet wine. Now we're talking about degrees, right?
Yeah.
But having one that's about the same sweetness or even a little bit less. But yeah, in general, you're going to want a sweet wine because again, because the sugar from the dessert is going to cause the wine to seem a little drier and a little less fruity. So it's going to dial back the sweetness that's already there in the sweet wine.
Okay. Well, let's just touch on what we think are the two most popular Thanksgiving pies, and you kind of what you might recommend to have with those, pumpkin and pecan.
Yeah. So I think that, in a way, pumpkin is the more difficult one. But what I would say would be any kind of sweet wine that comes from a white grape variety. So whether it be a late harvest or sweet Riesling or Gewürztraminer. I just recently tasted through some Austrian sweet Gewürztraminers, and they were really, really good. I actually do not like Gewürztraminer very much when it's dry. It's one of the wines I just don't drink very much. I don't prefer it. But when they're sweet, they can be really, really good. So any of those that are like in the white grape variety that is made into a sweet wine.
Okay. And then pecan pie.
So pecan pie, you've got these pretty bold flavors and a lot of sugar. I think you could still do those type of wines I was just talking about, but I would go even sweeter on pecan pie, or and so that there are sweet red wines that you could do. But then I would actually go to. I mentioned Tawny Port. The reason why I think I personally like Tawny Port with pecan pie is that not only is Tawny Port sweet, right? So we're talking red grapes now, and we're talking about sweet wine, but Tawny Port in particular is made in a way that is more oxidative. So you're going to get more of those nutty flavors. And I just think that it's a great complement to the nuttiness of pecan pie. So personally, that is my favorite combination. And by the way, a lot of people have never had Tawny Port. It's not super popular, but if you haven't, try it. See what you think. Again, with trying wine, nothing really terrible is going to happen.
Yeah. And you're saying tawny because so those that don't know, there's Tawny Port and then there's the Ruby Port.
Correct.
And we're saying go with Tawny Port on this one.
Yeah, because again, the way that they're made differently, and without getting, I guess we could do a whole episode.
No, we don't need to
do
that.
Yeah, exactly.
But would Madeira be kind of in that category as well? Then?
Madeira would be great.
Yeah.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that because Madeira is one of my very favorite wines. it's not super popular, but like one of the sweeter side of Madeira, so like a bowl Madeira, um, would be, and this might be the case where you might want to just ask somebody in the wine store about Madeiras and some that are on the, sweeter side. That would be a terrific choice.
Okay,
Yes.
that's kind of what I was thinking. Let's finish up this episode with a lot of us have guests and family that come from out of town. And so you have the guests who are spending the night. And you're going to get up the next morning and everybody's still like, ready for some alcohol. So
Yeah.
do you have some favorite, if you're cooking a breakfast and having, something with family the next morning, do you have some favorites that you like? An Irish coffee. You go cocktail, mimosas. What do you like?
Yeah. So I may be a little bit different. I'll want to hear what you have to say on this because you might have tastes that run different to mine. First of all, when you talk about coffee, I'm just kind of a coffee purist, frankly. I mean, I make drip coffee for my wife and for me every single morning. I don't mind taking the time doing it, and I don't put anything in my coffee. So while maybe once a year I'll have a coffee that's spiked or an Irish coffee or something, it's just not something that I really want very often, frankly. So, the next morning, yeah, I'm probably just doing coffee. But if and then the other thing is, my wife loves Bloody Marys. Um, I don't, but I like the orange juice base, so I'll have a screwdriver, um, or I'll have a Harvey Wallbanger, which is kind of an old fashioned drink to
Yeah.
have, but something like that I would have the next morning.
And I'm with you. I'm a coffee purist as well. I love coffee. So I would probably be up earlier than the rest of the folks and have my coffee out of the way. My wife as well loves Bloody Marys. I'm okay with them. I mean, I don't crave them like she does. If we're going to go to brunch, she always wants a Bloody Mary. I'm not that big on them. I'll be honest. I'm not a huge alcohol drinker in the mornings.
Yeah.
If I were, because of my recent my recent getting into champagne, I might want some bubbles in the morning.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on what time in the morning we're talking about. Like,
I'm
but yeah,
talking brunch time,
okay,
10:30
brunch.
to
Yeah, you're for
12,
brunch. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, to me, once the clock hits 10 a.m., I don't feel too terrible about having champagne.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
if
But let me.
somebody, yeah.
Oh, and I'm curious. Like, I think we both make pour over coffee. Like I said, I make pour over coffee every day. I use the V60 now. I used to use the Chemex, but
Are you
um,
using the V60 now?
I use it every day.
Do you
Yeah,
really?
yeah. So thank
Okay.
you
I'm
for
glad to hear
saying
that.
that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and if you have people spend the night, you have a lot of. I mean, honestly, I got to be completely frank with you. After a big Thanksgiving and all that's gone on, and the next morning people are getting up at different times, it's going to be probably one of the rare situations where I just go to. We have a nice local coffee shop, and I'm just going to pick up drinks for everybody. There might be somebody in the group who wants a pumpkin spice latte or whatever. That's the other thing about coffee. People like it differently.
Yeah.
I don't really not really set up to make, you know, 8 different types of coffee drinks for people. So it might be one of those times where we just head over and take everybody's order.
Yeah. And I'm might be called the wine snob. I'm probably also called the coffee snob because my wife is like, even today, she mentioned, well, my mom's coming in town, her mom, and should we get some instant coffee for her? Because her
Right.
mom drinks instant coffee. And then her rest of her family will drink coffee. But I did this once before, and I learned my lesson of grinding really good beans and pure coffee flavor.
Yeah.
And them going, what kind of sweet creamer do you have? Hazelnut? Do you have cream?
Right.
Vanilla cream? What do you have? French vanilla? And I'm like, okay, I've learned my lesson. I'm gonna
Yeah.
get the old coffee pot out, and I'll make a big pot for them and their cream, and then I'll make my pour overs for me.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I feel you on that one because yeah, I do the same thing. I mean, we've talked about this a lot.
And
But
I'm
yeah,
not judging
nice.
them. I'm not judging them. They can
No,
drink coffee however they want.
yeah, but Right. Yeah, I agree. It's funny. Do you do the opposite thing? Like, so I used to go to my mom's house every Christmas morning, and my mom just makes horrible coffee. She likes flavored coffees for
Yeah.
some reason,
Pecan
and
or
it's
whatever.
so
Yeah.
hazelnut or whatever. It's so disgusting. So what I would do is I'd get up a little bit early. I'd make my own coffee, put it in a Yeti, and just bring it over to my mom's house so I could drink my own
There
coffee
you go.
over there.
Now, we do have a couple of people in my wife's family that are big, coffee drinkers. And so for them, the V60 is great because I can still get, 50 grams of coffee in there and make a nice big pot and do that a couple times and we're good to go. For them, I love, like anything else, I love sharing it. People who say they're getting into coffee, or if you just drink it black, you go, I like my coffee black, but you never had real good coffee. I always love making them a really good cup of coffee and them going,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't realize it could taste this good,
Oh yeah, and you notice the difference. I mean, if you're somebody, and I used to go to Starbucks every day, and I still do. I did the other day when I was on the road, coming to visit with you. But once you start making really good coffee at home, it's so easy to notice the difference.
Oh, it's a huge difference too. It's just not, it's not a little
Oh
nuance
yeah.
that you're picking out. It's punch you in the face different.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered about everything, Chris. I appreciate you doing this episode with me. I thought it'd be fun just to kind of talk through Thanksgiving and you kind of guide us through, how we don't have to be so stressed out about wines and kind of what some options are with, having wines and kind of what the approach can be for Thanksgiving with a smaller crowd and a bigger crowd. So thanks for doing that.
Hey, I love doing it, Rob. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey, and I hope everybody has a fantastic and wonderful Thanksgiving with friends and family. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour. Thanks again, Chris.